Okay, this morning's webinar should last under 30 minutes, and it is on transaction templates and default fills. So just a little background on what those two items are. A transaction template is something that we set up in Transaction Desk that contains forms and documents that we would use for a particular transaction type. Now at the board level, we currently have two of those set up that are available to all of you. And that is a residential purchase template or residential sale template and a residential listing template. And those templates include those common forms and documents. So for instance, on the sale, and we'll take a look at that right quick, it's going to have things like the purchase contract, the residential inspection addendum, radon, lead-based taint, termite, septic, things like that, including the lead-based paint brochure and the radon brochure. On the listing side, of course, there's a listing contract and our real property disclosures and things like that. So those are the most two common items we would probably use templates for. However, we might also develop templates for things like repair addendums. If there's common documents that you want to use for that, or when there's a tenant present. Or we do have some companies that have developed multiple sale and listing templates. For instance, if they want a separate template for a property that was built prior or post 1978, so that they don't have to deal with the lead-based paint disclosure and pull it and out. But those are all up to you. So templates are available at three levels. They are available at a board level, which of course the board maintains and changes those. If you're a managing broker, you can set up templates at an office level so that template is available to any agent that is underneath you in your office, or it's available at an agent or an individual level. So you can set up a template if you're not a managing broker, or if you don't want the rest of your office to have access to it and you are a managing broker, but you can set those up at the agent level. So let's take a look at how to create those or copy those, and then also talk about default fills at the same time or there shortly after. So this is all accessible through Transaction Desk. And just as a reminder, this morning I'm logged in through an account where my brokerage is with the appraisal firm. So if you see Corey Appraisal and Consulting, you'll know what that is there. So from within in Transaction Desk, we're going to come down on the left-hand side and go to Setup or Settings. It's that gears icon. And then you'll see one of the options that we have from the Setup options is Transaction Templates. And you'll see I've got two in here. I've got a board level new listing template and a board level new residential sale template. And it says those were created by Decatur Association of Realtors. So those are actually things I won't be able to edit. But I do have two options. I can either add a template and start in entirely from my own, or I can choose to copy one of these templates and make modifications to it. So for instance, let's say we'll do that on the default fill. We'll make a copy of it. But let's say I want to build my own personal residential sale template. I'm just going to come up here to hit add. It asks me to give that a name. And so I'm going to call this one Paul. And I'm going to call this residential sale template. Okay. For type, I'm going to say it's a residential sale, and I could add a short description in down here, but I'll just hit save. And it pulls me into this. Now, we can include lots of things in templates. We can include checklists and templates, which I'm going to do another webinar here in a couple weeks on checklists, but we won't talk about that now. Contacts. If you're building this for an office and you have an office administrator and you want them added in because they always do some checking and things like that on there, you can default add your office administrator in because they would not be there by default in the board template into here. So we've got documents and folders, forms, and sharing. So this is important too. So remember, documents in Transaction Desk by default are things that are static and cannot be changed, or are things that are not auto-populated. So, but if you have a particular document that you put in here, that doesn't require any filling out on the buyer or seller's part, it's just something static that you include, maybe it's some home warranty information, whatever it is that you want to provide to that, in this case, potential buyer, but it's nothing that gets filled out. That can go in here under documents and folders. But most of the things we're going to add are going to come from forms. So I'll see right now I don't have any forms, but I'm going to choose to add them in. And I can search or I can just browse for them. We're going to open up current sales forms and I'll pull them from there. So we'll say the first thing that I know I want in here is that residential sales contract, or that real estate purchase contract. So I'm going to add it in. We see it, put it in my basket. I don't have to individually add these. I can add them all at one time. So I've got my contract. I'm going to do my residential inspection addendum. I'll do my radon inspection addendum. And I will do my termite and wood. We'll say that I typically use a seller paid, so I'm not going to put the buyer paid in there. Here's a well and septic. If we want to put it in there, and I've got radon. I want maybe you want the for information only page. Maybe you want to go ahead and put your deed prep in there, for the buyer to fill out there. So I'll include that. And let's say that's all I want to include for now. And so I'm just going to hit add. So these 7 forms have now become part of my default template. If I wanted to add others in, I could do that there. I simply need to update this. Right? And then what you will see is anytime I create a new transaction now, so whether that be from the MLS, whenever I'm on a listing sheet, so if I jump over here, and for instance, I'm on this listing, and I'm going to create a sales contract for that because this is a sale. If I were to come here, do the transaction desk icon, I will now see in that create transaction option for the template, I've got Paul residential sale template. And if I choose that, and I'm just going to exit the wizard real quick so I can get to this quickly. If I go to forms, I will see all of those forms that I selected for the template are now automatically a part of this transaction. And the auto population works. So if I come into this real estate purchase contract, we will see now, again, I did not fill out any buyer information, so we don't have a buyer here in the template, but we'll see that that information is auto populating just like we would expect it to. Okay, so another way to do a template is to copy or modify an existing template, mainly copy unless you own it. So to do that, we'll just come to setup and transaction templates. And let's, for instance, do this on the board level listing template. So instead of adding a new one, I'm just going to hit my menu over here next to the right of that and hit copy. And I'm going to name this one Paul Residential Listing Template. And create. Also, something I forgot to mention over here is the ownership of this, and you'll see this says board level or client level, and this is agent. I am not a managing broker, so I cannot change this here. If you're a managing broker, you can edit this. So let's go to this listing. And you'll have an option in here for who that's available to, and you can choose office or an individual agent right there at the default portion. But I've copied this one, so at any rate, since I copied the boards, you'll see that down here in forms, I've already got all of these forms included. And of course, you could add any in on your own or take any of these out that you did not want. Now, this brings us to the notion of default fills. When you have an individualized template, or if you're doing it as a managing broker from an office level, you can specify default fills. Now, I encourage you to use these with caution, but let me give you some good examples. Like on our exclusive right to sell contract from Illinois Association of Realtors. Default fills are going to be things that are filled out by default every single time. Okay, So it would not make sense to fill out like the property address, city, state, or zip in a default field, because that's going to change based on the property you're listing. You wouldn't want a defined marketing period. But if it's always, okay, but if you always have this box checked, and if you always do an automatic renewal on it, okay, or you always might do an automatic renewal on it, you can check one of those, okay? Like down here, if you are always, let's say 6%, okay, or that's your default, you can go ahead and put the 6 in there, and then your agent, or whenever you're filling this out, doesn't have to fill this out. If your protection period is always 180 days, you can always fill that out, and then I'll show you how this works here in just a second, right? Let's say it's always B, okay? We'll do that. I always want these to be yeses. Okay, if this is individual, okay, not for an office level, or if you as the managing broker are always here, you can go ahead and fill this out, right? So I'll say Paul Brown. And I'll fill this one out too. If it's a limited home warranty, maybe we don't do that. $0, right? If you're always including the attachment, so you know, you're including attachments there, you can go ahead and type those out there as well. If you have your sponsoring brokerage, you know, you could go ahead and fill out that information there as well. So any of that, default fills. What this does, save and save, is now this one is on a listing template, okay? So now whenever I would use it, so let me just go back to transaction desk, okay? And I'm gonna create a transaction for a listing. I'll call this one sample listing. Say 280, we'll use something a little different. We'll use 3 Waters Edge. But now from my template, again, you've got Paul Residential Listing Template, or whatever you named it. My select source, I'm going to import from Realist real quick just so we get some good data here. I'm going to switch to Edgar County and do a search here right quick. Yep. There it is. Hit create. And again, in the interest of time, this morning, I'm just going to go straight to these forms and not fill out the wizard. But what you'll see if we open up that exclusive right to sell contract is, yes, it's populated information from Realist. That's what I just did. But you will see that these default fills are already filled out. So that box is checked. The 6% is in here. My 180 days, although I need to decrease that font size, is in there. B was automatically checked here. All my yes boxes here. My sponsoring broker designation there, and my undersigned here. So that is transaction templates and default fills. I think you understand you can do the same thing on the sales purchase side, but let me go back to that right quick. So if there are things that you're always filling out by default in the purchase contract, and an important note here, it does not preclude you from changing them in an individual transaction. It's just the default. But here, if in our purchase contract, you know, we say that, you know, that additional earnest money is always within 10 days. And if our earnest money is always held by the listing broker, right? Those are things that we can do for default fills. We have people here in the additional agreements in rural areas that are writing things about if the subject contains a propane tank, that the propane is prorated, you know, at the market price the day of close. Here's a great one, the addendum and riders. Well, you know, if you're always or by default including a residential inspection, radon, well and septic, termite, lead-based paint, the disclosure, and the real props, you know, you can always check those by default. And then whenever you use those will be checked. Now, if you're using an in-town property, obviously doesn't have a well and septic, Then whenever you're preparing that purchase contract, you can uncheck that, or maybe you want to leave it unchecked by default. That's entirely up to you. But those are just things, those are default fills. And the idea is that they can save you some time for things that you always do. However, the warning is, don't get lackadaisical and just assume it's done and correct, because then you may be producing a contract where some of those items do not apply. So that is a quick 15 minutes on how to create transaction templates and default fills. At this time, I'm going to stop that recording, and I will take any questions that you might have in the chat window or by audio if you turn it on.